So I kind of got it in my mind to ask to be an embed freelance photographer. I wasn't working for anybody. I approached the Army in New York City. I told them I was with the Army in Vietnam. I'd like to see how the Army lives today. And so I had to get my own body armor, my own Kevlar helmet. I had to get my airplane tickets to and from. They said, okay, they got me approval at certain locations with certain units to go to stay with them. The military, the Army would guarantee me transportation. That could be anything, food, and a place to sleep. And that can mean anything as well, MREs. And so I went with the idea that I just photographed anything and everything. I'm just observing, trying to get any sort of sense. What was the life like? What was the stressors about? Because I've already been through this a little bit already. And both in Iraq and Afghanistan, we weren't in a jungle environment. We're in a desert environment. But I can tell you, it felt the same way when we're driving down a narrow street in Baghdad, and I'm looking up 3 or 4 stories, and people are up top on cell phones. And I'm telling the lieutenant, the TC, the tank commander sitting in front of me in a shotgun, I said, sir, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm in Ambush Alley. This is like being in the jungle, and you've got people on either side looking at you, beating the tom-toms or something, passing the word down the line, and sooner or later, somebody's going to put 2 wires together on a battery and blow up a 105 shell. Well, that's an IED today. We had command detonated booby traps. Same problem, new technology. And so we didn't know which one of these phones they were talking on or waiting to press a button and blow it up or blow us up. So, the lieutenant said, Roger that. If anybody looks at me funny, sound out because we'll light them up. And so all of a sudden, I'm a soldier again. I'm living this stuff. It was in my, I was keyed, I was alert. And so I started to feel what they were feeling to a certain degree. And you go on ops day and night. And it was spooky. And one thing I tell students, anybody I can get it 2 seconds with, for instance, Vietnam is a country. It's not a war. Vietnam is spelled 2 words. It always has been. Viet means people. Nam is south. That was to differentiate them from the north, the people of the north, which is the age-old enemy, the Chinese. And our style manuals and all the printing that we've had from middle 80s on spells Vietnam 1 word. So we really don't understand the cultural issues and the history of our war in Vietnam, or the French war in Vietnam. And you really need to look at the facts and dig a bit before you start believing things from emotional points of view.
Today, Thursday, which is June 8th, 2023 at 10:30 a.m. I'm Rex Gossett, a VA veteran volunteer here at the VA, and interviewing Ted
Engelmann.
Engelmann, did I get it correct? Ted Engelmann at the Rocky Mountain VA Regional Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado, as part of the Remembering Our Veterans program. So starting, Ted, can you tell me a bit about your childhood? Where you were born?
Where I was born, Bloomington, Indiana. My father was on the GI Bill at Indiana University, and I was born in January 1947. Mm-hmm. And Dad was in school, and we lived in Bloomington for a while. And when the Korean War broke out, mm-hmm. Dad had been in World War II. He was in the reserves. And so the retreads, as they called them, were called back into service, along with trying to get new blood in the Army, because it was pretty depleted at the time after World War II. Everybody went home and tried to get a life going, obviously. So we were posted at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, just about an hour northeast of Boston. So I spent some formative years, not formidable, in Fort Devens. And so as a little boy, running around tanks and 30 caliber machine guns on 4th of July and Veterans Day activities, I kind of was an Army brat. And so after the war, we went back to Bloomington. We were there for a few more years. At 10 years of age in 1957, we moved to upstate New York. Dad was hired as the PR person for the State University of New York at Oneonta, a teacher's college. And we spent several years up there. My last year of high school, we moved to Johnstown, New York, about an hour north. Dad set up a community college, the Fulton Montgomery Community College. And I would say, never move a child their last year of high school. Please, if anybody reads this, take it to heart. Don't do that to your kid. So we moved there. My last year of high school, I barely graduated. And as a result, I graduated in June of 1965. And the draft was going for Vietnam. So the Army and the Marines were taking anything that walked, talked, or crawled sideways. And to avoid the draft, I just didn't want to go to Vietnam and get killed, basically. And so I went to the community college for a semester. I got on academic probation right away. And I saw the handwriting on the wall. So I decided to check out the Navy and the Air Force. The Navy said, hey, if you enlist, we have 4 years. You can be on a nuke sub underneath the ice pack for 6 months at a time. I said, thanks, but no thanks. And I went to the Air Force. And so I wore a little blue outfit like some doorman at a hotel. And so I spent 4 years in the Air Force. And the whole point was to avoid combat arms, avoid Vietnam. However, my 3rd year in the Air Force in enlistment as a sergeant, I ended up in Vietnam anyway. So so much for the plans of mice and men.
Okay. You have any particular vivid or fond memories that you recall?
During the military, eh?
Right.
A vivid one, fond memories. There were good people. There's good times. There's interesting times. So there's a lot of that just kind of keeps going on and on. I mean, it's like your life in general. You have friends and you do things with them, and you go places and you have experiences. Some hopefully really good, and sometimes you get kind of in a jam. However, the vivid ones are the ones that are memorable, and they're with me staying here even today, here in Denver, as it turns out. I was in the Air Force. In Vietnam, I was assigned to be with a forward air control team, an Air Force team. We had pilots who were jet jocks. They could put in airstrikes because they had been fighter pilots and they knew how a fighter jet operated. I was located at Lai Khe, a village base camp for the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division. And Major General Keith Ware was the 1st Infantry Division commanding officer. And he had started off, I got there in March of 68 at the kind of the end of the Tet Offensive of 68. General Ware had been in Saigon, and he and his crew had fought at the U.S. Embassy, the Viet Cong who had infiltrated. So he had already been through the mill in Vietnam. Also remember, you don't remember, but also know that General Ware had received the Medal of Honor in 1945 for service with Audie Murphy, the Medal of Honor in France. And so from World War II, he was a Medal of Honor recipient. And he had fought in Korea, and he had been brought to Vietnam ostensibly to take over for General Westmoreland. And Westmoreland was evidently going to be Chief of Staff of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that was the kind of the pecking order that was being set up. So General Ware was in Saigon at the moment. He was then put into the position of commanding general of the 1st Infantry Division. He was staying at Lai Khe and working with the 3 brigades that we had. And on Friday the 13th, September 1968, I was on radios calling up tactical air in support of 3rd Brigade or 2nd Brigade troops who were being hit by an NVA regiment. And General Ware is not one to sit behind a desk. He got into his CNC, command and control chopper. He brought his XO with us, his executive officer. He had his dog, King, a German Shepherd, and he had his crew in the CNC. And they went up to evaluate and watch the happenings. I'm calling up from the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC, at Lai. The Army guys are on one end of the room, I'm on the other end, and so we hear each other, but I'm calling up tactical air, jets with bombs, napalm, whatever we need for General Ware's troops, and the troops on the ground are calling it in. So it was evidently a little after lunch. We heard on the radios on the Army side, Danger 6 is down. Danger 6 was a call sign for General Ware. And even right now, I'm getting goosebumps. So everybody's worried. What's going on? What's the status? Because nobody knows. It's a very fluid situation. So as it turned out, very quickly, General Ware was hit. His chopper was hit by an RPG, and so he went down. And so the next thing was people were trying to recover him, get to the site, secure it, and find out what's going on. Well, everybody on board was killed. And my feeling was, intellectually, obviously I couldn't have anything to do with it. I'm doing my job, trying to get tactical air in support. But emotionally, I took it on that this was my responsibility, that he died on my watch. And if I had only done something more, I could have maybe protected him and saved his life. So for almost 20 years later, on every Friday the 13th, it didn't matter what month it was, especially if it came on September, I hid. I didn't do drugs, I didn't drink, I just hid. I just got quiet. And it was this memory, this feeling of being responsible for his death. And so that's a vivid memory. And it came back to haunt me again in 2003 when I found out that General Ware had graduated from Denver's South High School in 1933. Okay. He was born here in Denver. And there was no public record of him in that high school. And it took 11 years to have something, a small plaque developed, and the ROTC instructor, a lieutenant colonel, drag his heels every bit of the way and would not help out. I have no idea why. And yet in January of 2014, there was a 30-minute little ceremony dedicating the plaque, and it was all over, and the colonel retired right after that. So there's a little plaque in South High School, right in the main hall, right across from the admin office, shows General Ware.
Interesting.
So those are some things that kind of, stayed with me and kind of created some activities for me to get involved with over the years.
Okay, what motivated you to join the military? Were you drafted? Did you enlist?
I enlisted. My motivation was I enlisted in the Air Force for 4 years. And my motivation was to avoid Vietnam, combat arms, and getting killed. And that was the simple truth of it. The Army and Navy were drafting, and if a young man, 18 years of age, didn't have a student deferment or a physical deferment of some sort, you were live meat, and your local draft board would pick you up. And that's where the Army and the Marines would take you in, and 8 weeks, 10 weeks later, you'd be overseas. So that was my motivation, and that was the direction I headed.
Okay. So what wars did you serve in, and where exactly did you travel, and for how long?
The war I served in the military was Vietnam. And I was in Vietnam in March of '68 at the end of the Tet Offensive. And I was there until March of '69. As a civilian, I have been as an embed freelance photographer in Baghdad, Iraq with the Army as a photographer, and I was in Afghanistan starting out at Bagram Air Base. in November of 2009. So in November of 2008, Iraq, November of 2009, Afghanistan. So those were civilian experiences, but I was with the Army troops at all times.
Okay. Well, during your time in service, do you recall any particular primary job assignments or responsibilities that stand out?
In Vietnam, my job was to work with radios, either in a tactical operations center, a TOC, in a radio jeep, calling in airstrikes or supporting airstrikes with the pilots who are flying, or flying in the back seat of an O-1E, a bird dog, a Cessna airplane. We had white phosphorus rockets on the wings of the O-1E, and when we found a target to mark, we fire a rocket in, big white smoke plumes up, and the jets then can see that, and the pilot can direct them one way or the other, one right, left, short, long, to the smoke. So my job, I could be in one of three locations on a daily basis supporting the airstrikes, and that was my primary job.
Ted, do you recall any particular unusual events or humorous events that stand out?
A humorous event was we captured a lot of, at Lai K, the base camp, the 3rd Brigade troops in their foyers, they captured a lot of Russian rockets, 122 millimeter, about the size of a grapefruit diameter. And on the 4th of July, they fired back the Russian rockets into the Michelin rubber plantation. And so as it turned out, all the enlisted and all the low level people were put off to the side. We could watch from like the 50-yard line, watch these rockets get fired off. And all the officers were kind of up this little hill on folding chairs, and they could watch the rockets take off. And they were at the other end of the rocket. So when they fired the rocket off, there's this enormous blast, and I have photographs of this, and all of a sudden you heard the rocks and the dust going bing, 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 bing off these steel chairs. And the officers, the general wear up front, they were getting beat the heck out of. All these rocks were hitting them so bad. And all of us guys were sitting here kind of watching. Oh, too bad, sir. That's really sorry, Captain. Okay. Oh, Major, are you all right, sir? And we were just laughing our heads off because of the rank gets up close. Well, they got close in the wrong direction. Yeah. So that was kind of a funny thing, but they got bruised, but they survived.
You have any particular best experience that you recall?
Best experiences. What would be a best experience? A pilot who was called back from medical leave, medical retirement, Major Anderson, and I flew together in the Mekong Delta. And Major Anderson was not happy that he was called back in from medical retirement. I think he had a disc or something in his back that was really screwed up. So when he sat somewhere for a little period of time, like more than 5 or 10 minutes, his body was formed that way. And so it was painful for him to get up and then kind of straighten up. So when we flew, his whole idea was to look for targets that were not what the ARVN was giving us in the Mekong Delta. So we were saving lives by taking out the armaments and the material and the ammo and the sampans that had been submerged in the canals. And we would put our targets on those as opposed to hitting the little villages that were around there, because they only had the women, the children, elderly. All the guys were gone. They were in the VC or ARVN, had sucked them up. Yeah. So I really respected him, and part of it was because he was so ticked off. But that was one of the better things that I felt that we did that I was part of as far as in the military and being in Vietnam. We saved lives as opposed to taking them.
Any particular medals or citations or any awards that you recall?
No, I have a few, but honestly, I don't remember what they are. I have some presidential citation for something that I was part of the Army activity. But kind of the standard stuff that all the vets have that we came out of Vietnam.
Okay. Having left the service, but any particular occupations you had after your service? And what are you currently doing?
Well, I finally went to college and got a teaching certificate, sciences, and so I've been a middle school, high school, college instructor. I got interested in what happened to us as veterans once we got back from Vietnam. And so I started to photograph the parades and monument dedications in America of the Vietnam vets. And so since the 70s, I had been doing that, with most of that activity going on in the early 80s. And so I was making photographs here in America. And then in 1989, I did my first trip back to Vietnam. And then I started to go places such as, I had 2 other veterans that went with me, and we ended up throughout Vietnam with a Denver woman, a Viet Q, Vietnamese overseas, and we had Channel 4 here in Denver with us. So this was one of the little signs I made. It was kind of my own documentation of the trip where I could go. And I have made a bunch of photographs of different sort of places that we were at. A Buddhist temple in Hue, which was destroyed on the interior. The Buddhists had rebuilt it. You can still see the bullet holes in the compound walls out on the outside.
That's
And
the periphery out here. Yeah.
And so I kind of look at this as a metaphor that we all have our wounds, our scars on our skin, on the outside. And yet you can rebuild your spirit on the inside. And so this is what the Buddhists had done with their temple, and it's very functional. And they just left the bullet holes. That's not an issue. Another concern or issue was at the very beginning of coming back to Vietnam in 1989, where I think there was something like 26,000 Amerasian American soldiers and Vietnamese women had children.
Right.
And Vietnamese did not want them because they're called Lai Da Han. No, that was the Korean. They're called Doi Moi, the dust of life. Lai Da Han were the Korean children and Vietnamese children, and they weren't appreciated either. In a Confucian culture that you have to have family lineage, and this was not the lineage. So here's a black youth in a very pasty white. I thought it was European looking. And that's their street mother in front of the Palace Hotel where I was staying when in Saigon. And it was just this process of all these children, young at that age, who were growing up. They could not have jobs. They couldn't go to school. The cops would arrest one of them, put them in jail. The rest of the kids would then have to get money to bail them out, however they can make the money, steal or whatever.
Sounds like a society reject.
It was. In Australia, the first Welcome Home Parade was in October of '87. And so here's True Blue, their flag. We call ours Old Glory, the stars and stripes. And True Blue is if an Australian ever says, "You're True Blue, mate," that means you're the best of everything. You are their flag's values. And so here we are, together then, together again. And this was their first and only Welcome Home Parade for the Vietnam veterans in Sydney. When I went to Iraq, one of the situations was I went on patrols with the unit. I was at a combat outpost. And when I made this photo, the little boy is looking at me through the gate. But every time I turned around, I was reminded this was just like Vietnam. Our soldiers, big, tall, have all the guns, and all the children and all the people are running around trying to stay safe. And so the photo to me is kind of a reminiscent sort of picture. Things hadn't changed all that much. Also, it was ironic that in Iraq, the turret gunner in my Humvee, Wes, his father, as we were talking one afternoon after we'd come in from a patrol, he pulled out a Zippo lighter. And this Zippo lighter was his father's that the father gave to Wes. On one side was the names of all the guys in his squad back in 1972. On this side, it says Vietnam 71-72. You have never lived till you've almost died. It's one of those iconic sayings that the Vietnamese would engrave on our Zippos, and guys would buy it and pass them around and take them home. And Wes's father kept it and gave it to Wes. Now Wes is using it in Iraq, in Baghdad. So 40 years later, or 30 some years later, here's another war being passed on from father to son. And this is what we call the 7-flag Chu Hoi Pass. Chu Hoi means I give up. And so the Vietnamese flag is in the center. And this is America's flags that we got to come to Vietnam to fight. So we got South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and the Philippines. So that's the 7 flags. The center one is the South Vietnamese flag, the Republic of Vietnam, RVN. See, there's 2 words there. And so this shows the front side is that. Oh, so
real quick.
I'm sorry.
No. Let's film this.
Okay. I mean, this document is not in our textbooks. Here's one.
Okay.
And the document is not in our textbooks. So I give this out at conferences to teachers. And on the bottom is my little statement that you can cut off. So it is 7 centimeters by 15 centimeters. And you cut off that little white spit. So you have the actual document. You can stick it on your wall or something like that. I give them 2 or 3 because I printed up 1,000 of these. And the idea is this is not in our textbooks. This shows who was fighting in Vietnam on behalf that Johnson got there. These are our many flags, as he called it. Well, there were 6 flags. That's all. And so when we have the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I have photographs of those flags, if you will, who showed up. And from Korea, they had 3 Koreans show up in Iraq. And that meant that Korean flag could be shown in Iraq as supporting America in our fight against Saddam. And so it doesn't matter how many troops you got. If your flag is there, you're on board. And so these are the little political games that happen. And on the backside, in Vietnamese, is talking to an ARVN soldier, Army of the Republic Vietnam, is pointing for the Viet Cong to come in. Hey, we'll give you rice, we'll take care of you, we'll move your family, we'll protect you if you come to our side. So that's the Chu Hoi, meaning arms up. On this side, at the top is Vietnamese, followed by English, Korean, and Thai, saying the person who's handling this, don't shoot them just yet. They are coming in under Chu Hoi. This is their safe conduct pass. So and we drop these all over the damn ground. I mean,
so the North Vietnamese could transport across
South
the line.
Vietnamese.
I know, but those are North Vietnamese coming across. Is that right?
Right, but the Viet Cong are South Vietnamese who are fighting for the North.
Yeah, right.
And so we're trying to get to them to stop the sniping because the North Vietnamese are in regiments and they don't get this.
Okay.
But we're just littering the ground with this stuff. And I happened to pick one up and send it back to my folks, and Dad kept it for me. Thank you. And so this is the only document which is not being shown in America that indicates who is fighting on our behalf. Who did Johnson get to fight in Vietnam? And with the language, you can see what it's about. And on the back, because you can't read it, you get the sense of there's something going on here. I kind of thought it was interesting when I was in Iraq. At Thanksgiving, the military, the Army, is always giving us Thanksgiving meals. And in November of 1968, I was in the Mekong Delta with an advisory team, and we had Thanksgiving choppered to us in in containers that had hot food in it. And so we had our menu from 1968, and I have that. I should have brought it, but I couldn't find it last night before this. In 40 years later, this is the menu from Thanksgiving at the COP, at the outpost that I was at in Baghdad. And it's the same food. I think we had leftovers from 1968. And so there's our menu. And here is the Army the front of this little piece, and I happened to snag one because in my mind, I'm old enough and smart enough nowadays to capture steal anything I can to recognize I was there, what this means, and what's it about. And so Operation Iraqi Freedom at the bottom down here, this is their logo. And so this was their kind of PR piece at the time. And there are two of them in here. So this is what I brought back. And again, it was interesting to be with the Army 40 years later, from when I was 21 years old in Vietnam. And so when I was with the guys in Baghdad, they knew I was a vet from Vietnam, and I was probably treated a little differently than the normal reporters and photographers and people, civilians who go out with them. So that was kind of interesting. And so I have my 68, 2008 menus from Thanksgiving. It's just one of those things that if you go places, pick up a menu and pick up the napkins or anything that has names and dates on it, and you can kind of keep it if you want for posterity, your children, or doing these little presentations and sharing your story with what you've been, where you've been in the military, and how that's affected your life later on in life.
Thank you again.
Did you make this yourself?
No. I was, this is a cap I was given in Bagram Air Base. We're about 45 miles north of Kabul. And it's probably a one of a kind because you could get these things made everywhere. The guys got the patch made, and I had them spell Vietnam 2 words. And Iraq was my next base or my next event, and then Afghanistan. So this is the little, the tan cap that all the contractors are wearing these days. And so this was the sort of hat I was using when I was in Afghanistan. I don't wear it much. I don't advertise, but it was my way of kind of indicating where I've been. The 3 wars, even though one I carried a gun. Iraq, I carried a gun one time, and but I was a civilian in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is kind of my little memento on a personal, it's kind of grudging and all that. But all of this stuff goes into a collection that will be donated to the University of Denver Special Collections and Archives. And so these are some of the things that are part of that collection.
I was hoping we could touch on, because we've talked about this, but why did you go back as a civilian for the other 2 wars? Like, why bother if your war experience wasn't your own?
I was reading a lot of articles. We all saw the articles and TV pieces, but mostly articles like in the Atlantic and Time magazine and newspapers. Pretty good long size articles with photographs indicating the high rate of suicide. Now, what high rate is? More than one is a high rate in my mind. I mean, more than one suicide of a military personnel doing the job they're doing and having some sort of emotional problem with that to die of suicide. In my estimation, it was just, the question is, why would a good soldier kill themselves, herself, or himself? And there were so many of those articles that in 2008, I just got it in my head, I want to find out what's going on. In the Denver Boulder area, in the 80s, a few friends of mine died of suicide who were Vietnam vets. And there was no rhyme, no reason to it. One guy was working with a veteran organization, just had a brand new baby, and he took himself out. I mean, what the heck is going on? Why would he do that? He was a smart guy. He was helping me out, and I knew him. And there were others. And so the question was, in my generation, coming out of the Vietnam War, mostly after the war, between 75 to about 85 or so, 1985, there was a high rate of suicide. That I believe was a high rate. And the number is debatable, 200,000, 50,000 to 200,000, something like this, veterans. But nobody was counting. It was like after World War II. Nobody counted how many World War II veterans were getting drunk because alcohol was now new to our social system. And people were driving drunk into trees intentionally, no brake marks. So nobody was watching, nobody's counting, nobody was thinking about it in that way. So when we start seeing and finding the numbers jumping in Iraq and Afghanistan, soldiers who hadn't even been overseas yet at base at their post, like Fort Campbell, Kentucky, or something like this, if they're dying before, during, and after, what's causing this? So I kind of got it in my mind to ask to be an embed freelance photographer. I wasn't working for anybody. I approached the Army in New York City. I told them I was with the Army in Vietnam. I'd like to see how the Army lives today. And so I had to get my own body armor, my own Kevlar helmet. I had to get my airplane tickets to and from. They said, okay, they got me approval at certain locations with certain units to go to stay with them. The military, the Army would guarantee me transportation. That could be anything, food, and a place to sleep. And that can mean anything as well, MREs. And so I went with the idea that I just photographed anything and everything. I'm just observing, trying to get any sort of sense. What was the life like? What was the stressors about? Because I've already been through this a little bit already. And both in Iraq and Afghanistan, we weren't in a jungle environment. We're in a desert environment. But I can tell you, it felt the same way when we're driving down a narrow street in Baghdad, and I'm looking up 3 or 4 stories, and people are up top on cell phones. And I'm telling the lieutenant, the TC, the tank commander sitting in front of me in a shotgun, I said, sir, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm in Ambush Alley. This is like being in the jungle, and you've got people on either side looking at you, beating the tom-toms or something, passing the word down the line, and sooner or later, somebody's going to put 2 wires together on a battery and blow up a 105 shell. Well, that's an IED today. We had command detonated booby traps. Same problem, new technology. And so we didn't know which one of these phones they were talking on or waiting to press a button and blow it up or blow us up. So, the lieutenant said, Roger that. If anybody looks at me funny, sound out because we'll light them up. And so all of a sudden, I'm a soldier again. I'm living this stuff. It was in my, I was keyed. I was alert. And so I started to feel what they were feeling to a certain degree. And you go on ops day and night, and it was spooky, and so that's what I did. And so when I came back from both, well, the one in Iraq, the last young man, a Spec 4 that I shook hands with, they were rotating out in a few weeks. And at a lunchtime, he had lunch with a mutual friend who ended up telling me this. After lunch, he dumps his tray, goes into his living space, picks up his rifle, goes into the back end of an MRAP, armored vehicle, and dies by a single gunshot wound. And so that really got me because he's the last kid I shook hands with. And was a neat kid. And so that meant I had to go to Afghanistan to kind of check this out further. And that really was like Vietnam all over again. So I haven't written about it that much, but my sense is it's almost impossible to tell on an individual basis why we have any military who would commit suicide. There's so many reasons, but it's devastating, especially to the families. And friends of mine are running what they call 22 too many, which was the number of suicides running. It's maybe now 21. 4 active duty or reserve or guard members daily, and 17 veterans. Nationwide, worldwide, wherever they happen to be, but that would be the daily toll. Daily, 21 a day. And so the remaining families have to do all sorts of need support, need help, need understanding.
And that's a number that still is today?
I believe that number is still fairly active. Let's say from 21, it's down to 20 or 19. Okay. That's way too damn many. I mean, 1 is too many. It's a national tragedy that we would do this and set up our military in this way. Soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen. So or Coast Guard. And women now don't do, like in the old days in the 80s, the movie Valley of the Dolls. It was about women popping pills. They don't have to pop pills now. Our women know how to use an M4, how to use a pistol, and that's much more effective. And there's no coming back from it. You don't get your stomach pumped. And so, again, part of these, we have access to weapons and tools. If you're a civilian, you can get this stuff. It's easy. So that's the tragedy of it all right now. And so I need to write this up somehow. I just, my own issues get in the way, and so I haven't. But I'd like to put this out there somehow, that military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, all the things we have going on today because of the nature of the vehicles we were using, where we were at. These are things that we need to attend to and are going to be attended to in the VA for generations. Sad to say.
Okay.
Last question is, how does this lead into your upcoming project, One Soldier Story?
This is part of it. This is just representative of a document that is not being shown anywhere in education. And that's why I go to conferences and I'll come up with a title of some sort that's acceptable to that nature of the conference. And I'll bring these with me and I'll pass them out to people. It's the only way to get this stuff distributed. Although now we have higher technology and this sort of thing that I need help getting this stuff out, in some sort of form and a way. So physically, I pass those out. Virtually, you can Google this stuff online and you can find the 7 Flag Chuhoi Pass and you can learn about it that way. But people don't even know the name to look for.
So finally, do you have any upcoming projects that you're working on?
Well, I need help in the projects. I have about 50 interviews I made in 1994 of Vietnam veterans, spouses, and refugees. How did the war affect you, your job, your lifestyle, and physical or emotional well-being? They need to be transcribed, and I need help doing that. We have the technology today to do that really easy, but me alone. I've got cancer treatments coming up, and I'm going to be doing it probably pretty soon. So I need help. I'd like to take that and expand it and look at interview the Iraq and Afghan members in the same way. Just replicate that interview. And then I would also expand it to Korea, Australia, North and South Vietnam. And so the war in Vietnam would then be kind of covered, if you will. American, Korean, Australian are major allies, and the Vietnamese. And that's just that one war. How did that affect us and our cultures, our educational systems? And I think that would be helpful to know because it's just not out there and nobody knows. And so Vietnam is a country, not a war.
Okay. You have any particular hobbies, any interests?
Recently, because I got stuck in the pandemic here in Denver, I bought a canoe and I'm kind of getting out on the lakes and trying to get out on the river once in a while. So canoeing is something I've always enjoyed doing it, but all my lifestyle has been as a nomad. So canoe wasn't part of that. So now that I'm kind of here in Denver, haven't been traveling much since the pandemic. So I decided to get a canoe, get out a little bit, get in the waters, just kind of get some peaceful paddling, and kind of help me kind of reduce my stress levels a little bit. So that's pretty much what I'm doing as a hobby, I guess you could say. I don't fish. I haven't been doing anything else really.
Hey, you mentioned radio in Vietnam. Did you ever consider like amateur radio or any hobby of that sort?
When I got out of the service, I just had a blank mind. I was so emotionally screwed up.
Okay.
I was lucky I think my first degree, I finally got it 13 years later. So the stuff I did in the service kind of went by the wayside.
Okay.
Calling in airstrikes isn't something we do these days here, although I can almost imagine it. But no, I kind of let the military stuff go.
Okay. Any particular once-in-a-lifetime experience you care to share?
Well, the lifetime, because I've traveled in Vietnam for 30 years, from 1989 to the end of 2019. During that time here in America, I would do presentations for the National Council for Social Studies, Texas Tech University, the archives on the Vietnam War. And in 2005, in March, at Texas Tech, I saw two gentlemen, Rob Whitehurst and his brother Fred. Fred had been in Vietnam and had kept, he was an Intel Spec 4, and he kept two diaries, small diaries. They're about the size of your hand. And they were beautifully written by hand. And the person who had written them was Dang Thuy Tram. And she had been a medical doctor in the highlands or in a mountain area near Quang Nai. And Duc Pho was the village. And she was eventually seen and killed by American soldiers in June of 1970. And Fred kept the two diaries. And eventually he wanted to give them back, but he worked with the FBI, and that was not a good idea to try to have a communist connection. So he kept them, and Rob, his brother, who was also in Vietnam, was fluent in Vietnamese, had married a Southern woman. And so the two guys knew who this woman was. They had an awful lot of respect for her and her feelings about trying to get the foreigners out of the country. She wanted to be a communist member. She never was allowed at the time. And she had a secret person in her life, M. And so she was killed. And these diaries then told that story from 1968 to 1970 when she was killed. And so Fred, at this conference that I presented at, after he gave his after I gave mine, I'm looking in the scripts or the program, what else is going on? And I saw the word diary. And I'm working on a photographic memoir. And I thought somebody would teach us how to write better. So I was going to go to his presentation. It turned out he turned over the diaries to the archive. And so the two little diaries were sent there. Rob had the presence of mind. He scanned the front page, the front cover to the last cover, and he scanned it on a CD. So the technology of the day provided a second set of diaries on an electronic piece of material. And we had beers at that evening after their presentation, and Rob gave me a CD. And I left for Hanoi 4 days later, which was scheduled. And I gave my CD to a Vietnamese friend, woman friend of mine. And I went to Saigon to photograph 30 years after the fall of Saigon. What was it going to be like? What was the Vietnamese government doing? And how did they show it? And my friend started looking at the CD and the stories that were scanned there. And she discovered that she lived north of Hanoi, right near Noi Bai Airport. That's where Thuy's father had been a medical doctor. He was her family's doctor, or that hospital was hers. And she got real excited and interested. And the more she looked, she started to call people and find out from the older folk or from the younger people who were the older folks, where did they live? She found Mother Cham and the three remaining younger daughters a few blocks down the street from her office. And she called them, told them something about it. They got spooked because whoever calls in Vietnam saying, hey, I know your family and we have these diaries of your older sister. So I was in Saigon. They call me. I come back the next day and I gave the family the diaries. It was a big deal nationally, literally. And Kim, the youngest daughter, transcribed the diaries and published them in Vietnamese in August of 2005. In Vietnam, a run for a book, if it's 6,000 copies, is a bestseller. They have sold more than 500,000 copies in Vietnamese.
Oh, really?
It's been translated into 20-some languages and a feature film. And in English, 2 years later, was Random House published last night, I Dreamed of Peace, the Diaries of Dang Thuy Tram. And so in here are pictures. Thuy, this is a college picture, and in the end are family photos and pictures that are about her. And so this is now in English, it's in Korean, it's in many languages. And so now people can kind of get an idea how another person, a medical professional, what her life was like.
So that's still in publication now?
Uh-huh. Yes, it is. So that to me was probably one of the best things I could do for somebody is kind of give the family, they had never heard from her after, especially just before she died, and certainly not after. Her body was exhumed from the south, brought to the north, put into a cemetery for soldiers who had died because she had taken care of them in life. They take care of her in death. And so in the underworld, they are protecting her. So that is why she is one of the few civilians allowed to be in a military cemetery in Hanoi. And so it's been an interesting and very, very rewarding personal experience to be around the family, to know them, to see them growing up and where they've gone in their lives since 2005. And that's been a really interesting experience and a very rewarding one. So I feel good about that being my once in a lifetime. You don't have too many of these sort of experiences take place in your life.
How did your military service experiences affect your life? Or do you have any particular life lessons that you learned from military service?
Well, for one thing, I know that being in the military, we work together. We take care of each other. We have a mission. We have a job to do. And that's what we strive to accomplish. And we help each other out, make sure the mission takes care of it, that we do that. I would say those sort of values that we have in the military, getting the job done, taking care of yourself, those are individual right down to the personal experience, and then our unit and taking care of that. In civilian world, that's not the same thing. And so bringing those values into the civilian world, I think helps the civilians a lot. And so consequently, the military experience, difficult sometimes as it can be. I mean, we're all human beings and we're all people, so we have our experiences with each other. But we had friends, we traveled, we supported each other, we took care of each other when we could, and those things still resonate. So when I meet or I hear of a veteran around, first of all, I look out for them. Is there something they need I can do to help? Otherwise, just kind of keep an eye out and an ear out for everybody.
Is there anything particular things you miss about being in the service?
That's hard because sometimes I got out because I was really upset after Vietnam.
Or maybe things you're glad you left behind?
Yeah, there's some things I'm glad I don't have to do anymore. There were some, as we said, there were some chicken shit rules and things like that we had to follow. And so consequently, there were some things that didn't make sense, and it was military rules, and so you did it and got through it. And there was positive things, and yet right now so much of that is gone. But I want to take care, and my whole life has been to work and help as a veteran advocate, as an instructor, as a trainer for the facilitator for the transition assistance programs in Colorado. I was the primary facilitator at 5 different military installations in the early 90s, always helping out active duty, transition into veteran life and being a civilian. How does that happen? What can we do to help you guys and women and the family members get a better grip and handle on how to transition into be civilians?
Just to elaborate a bit more on that, what do you wish more people or civilians knew about veterans or military service?
I would say the sacrifices that the military makes, individuals and the families especially, the spouses. They're handling families. They're handling everything while the military person is out doing their work. And so the families have such a stress. I was a little Army brat myself, and Dad was out doing things and gone, and Mom had to take care of us.
I recall that from my days in the Navy. I mean, your wife didn't come in your sea bag.
Right.
So
And that was part of the joke,
family was secondary.
if the military didn't issue you a wife, what the heck do you have one
That's right.
for?
Yeah.
And the same thing probably could be said for the women. If you don't have a husband coming along at the green machine when you get all your gear, why are you looking for one? So times have changed, obviously, because we have more women in the military, but then we have more issues: military sexual assaults, MST, the military sexual trauma, issues that we've had today, like traumatic brain injury, moral injury, emotional wounds of war. These are issues that filter throughout the families and the civilian instruction or the civilian structure. So the military people know how, hopefully, are better prepared, but we still need the help, so much more help for the military families. And when they become civilians, we still have these issues. So the VA is really the place that we go to, and the veteran service organizations, the DAV, the American Legion, VFW, and the locations, the GI Forum. These are all the ways that the veterans get support and help as a civilian. So those are still ongoing, and they're necessary, and they always will be as long as we have vets.
Any particular things you'd like people to remember about your experience or your journey through the service?
One thing I tell students, anybody I can get it 2 seconds with, for instance, Vietnam is a country. It's not a war. Vietnam is spelled 2 words. It always has been. Viet means people. Nam is south. That was to differentiate them from the north, the people of the north, which is the age-old enemy, the Chinese. And our style manuals and all the printing that we've had from middle 80s on spells Vietnam 1 word. So we really don't understand the cultural issues and the history of our war in Vietnam, or the French war in Vietnam. And you really need to look at the facts and dig a bit before you start believing things from emotional points of view, especially today with all the misinformation, that they call it, or the AI type stuff that's floating around in the politics in our world. So please, for anybody, the things I've seen and done, what I try to offer are the insights, little bits and pieces that I've been able to glean, having gone and lived as a nomad for the past 40 some years. My interest is to help Americans become more culturally aware and understanding of themselves and other people. If you don't, you're going to be short-sighting, and you're going to be hurting yourself, which we've done a lot, and we still are doing. So maybe my journey, from my information, my materials, might help other people kind of get a wider perspective on life. And if they can't travel, maybe I can help them travel vicariously.
That leads into our final issue. If there's any particular message you want to leave for future generations as they view your journey here?
I would say, for one thing, have a healthy dose. Don't trust the government in all respects. Have a healthy dose of skepticism, because we've had, in my estimation, we've had 3 illegal wars. Vietnam was not declared. Read the Pentagon Papers, and you'll see how that was screwed up. And Daniel Ellsberg is on his last legs right now, literally. The war in Iraq, the American wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, you can read about them and their issues from the Afghan papers that were printed in August of 2019. These were showing how the government, the politics, lied, and how we got into these wars. And so, in a sense, you got to stop this stuff. First of all, war is not good for anybody. And if we're going to go to war, who's doing it, why we're doing it, where is it going to happen, and what are the results, and what's the expectations? And if you can't figure that out, and you don't know for sure, and you don't go listen to politicians who are just mouths, you got to watch out what's going on. And so please, have a healthy respect for the truth And that just doesn't come just because you happen to see or read it or hear it on TV, or some pundit that has some sort of a conspiracy concern. So please take it easy and dig deep and search your soul for what's going on and what's right. We're not here to kill each other. We're here to help each other out.
And one last thing, Ted, could you please tell us about your upcoming memoir book that you're working on?
I'm working on a photographic memoir. I've written stories. I have all the photographs. I've kind of assembled it. I don't know how to get it published. And the title is One Soldier's Heart, The Emotional Wounds of War. And soldier's heart is the term coined in the Civil War, 1864, for what we today call PTSD. They didn't realize that you had emotions that could cause physical manifestations like a rapid heartbeat, or you would have bad dreams, or you'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, or you had flashbacks. Today we know these things and we accept it as a psychological process of the emotions when you have a trauma, whether it's in war or you have a sexually assaulted trauma. These are things that stay with you. You don't heal from them. You don't heal from trauma. Trauma is going to be with you the rest of your life. You will recover. And hopefully with your path, individual, the time it takes, the process that you use, you'll be able to integrate that trauma into your life because you're still who you are, what you do, and how can you then better yourself and get along with that trauma that you can be part of society, whatever level you want to be at, but you'll be better, you'll be stronger than how when that trauma took you out of the circulation. So my book has a very short first chapter. What's the history of the terms? Where did we come from? The Civil War, it's limited. I mean, you can go back to the Greeks and the Peloponnesian Wars, but the Civil War in America, World War I, we call shell shock. World War II was combat fatigue, but that was, we can get people offline and put them back on, but then the real difficult one was the neuropsychiatrics, the NPs. And between 1945 and 47, half of the VA hospital beds were filled with NP cases. The Army and VA knew very well what emotional trauma had done to the soldiers. And between 47 to 1980, not much had been done about emotional trauma until the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, DSM-3, came up in the spring of 1980 and had, for the first time legally, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I refer to that today. It was good then because it forced the VA to treat us. But since then, I look at it as post-traumatic stress denial. It's like the national psyche of America did not want to remember or know what happened in Vietnam. We've moved on, and we still are doing that to ourselves as a national psyche. And so then we have, my book shows what I did, where I went, my military, coming back to the States, going overseas, the photos I've made, the people I've worked with and lived with in Vietnam, Korea, Australia, and the US. And then my embeds in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then the last chapter is SITREP, Situational Report. It's the conclusion. And that's what I hopefully, can kind of explain what I think and feel. And it's just to help people understand, again, a lot of terms and places and things that they've never been able to see or go to themselves because they never did it. And bring this kind of to a way of a new bit of information that can hopefully expand the visions and understanding and the support. So veterans, for instance, can look at a picture of my base camp and the spouse is sitting next to them saying, oh, that's what a base camp looks like? Well, the guy said, you've never been there, you don't know. And he said, now I know. So literally and figuratively, they'll be on the same page. And all of a sudden, the vet doesn't have to go back to Vietnam. They can vicariously experience that. I can tell them, as an American war veteran, I am treated better in Vietnam than my own country. I've had people take advantage or hurt me here in America, and they know I'm a disabled vet, and they do it because they can. And so consequently, it's an interesting thing. I'm treated better in Vietnam, the country of my enemy, than I am my own country. So these are things I'd like to pass on, and that's what the book is about.
Particular final statement or comment you care to make?
I appreciate you listening and watching, and if there's anything I can do, you can Google my name and find out more, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Well, Ted, on behalf of the VA and those of us who are making the recording and those who will see it in the future, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate
My
you
pleasure.
being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, today, Thursday, which is June 8th, 2023.
July 8th. We can start over. No
Beg your
problem.
pardon?
July 8th, not June. July.
Today's
Oh my
June.
God.
It's June.
Sorry, my fault.
I was going to ask you, what are we doing?
It was originally July. Sorry. Oh, we have to change that to
That's
June.
funny.
Start over again.
Oh my God.
Today, Thursday, which is June 8th,